Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
Initially, we were planning on covering Genesis 41 this week, and God willing, we'll get to it potentially sometime this episode. I don't know how much time we're going to dedicate to this particular subject. However, as of recording, this is the week where Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And there are some other things that have happened this week that also were newsworthy and caused a bit of a stir in the Christian community and in the secular community as well. And we thought it would be a good time to address some of these issues because they are relevant to us as both a part of church history, because this is church history as we're living it today, but also because it does tie into the greater part of church history. There's really nothing new under the sun. The problems that we struggle with now, we've always struggled with. And so oftentimes the solutions to those problems we can find in the past where they've been dealt with then.
Yeah, so we're going to go through a brief list of some of the tragedies that have taken place this week and just review them and mourn together and talk about some of these issues. And then we'll jump into Genesis 41, which ties in really well to some of these subjects. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we are, as a nation, I would say, grieving the death of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was not just a conservative activist. He was a Christian. He was a father of 2 children. And he was the husband of Iryna Kirk. And they are activists not only for Christianity, but for things like the pro-life movement, among other things. And Charlie Kirk actually prayed for Cody and I by name recently for a personal prayer request that we have. And so it really broke our hearts when he died. It took us by surprise. And we feel like this is an assassination at the same level of MLK. So that's how we take it, and that's how we're going to talk about it tonight. But there are some other people who weren't famous who died this week, and we want to talk about them and some of the other incidences as well. And I think Charlie Kirk would appreciate us doing this because some of his last posts online were in defense of this young woman, Iryna Zarutska, who was brutally stabbed and murdered. She is a Ukrainian refugee and mother, and she was fatally stabbed in Charlotte, North Carolina on a bus. She was working multiple jobs to support her family, and nobody stepped in to do anything to save her. And the person who killed her was known for violent crimes and had, I believe, 13 convictions behind this incident that should have prevented him from even being able to access people outside of a prison system. But unfortunately, he took her life. And I believe, as Charlie Kirk believed, that we should say her name. So I am. And there were some other people who passed away. So there was an elderly couple, Frank and Maureen Olton. They were tortured and killed in their home and robbed in Belrose, New York. And there were several shootings this week. There was the Evergreen High School shooting in Colorado. 2 students were injured, and the shooter died by suicide. And there was also an accidental shooting at the U.S. Naval Academy that started from a false threat. And there have been a lot of threats and like fear-mongering at college universities and different things like that in America lately. And all of those things compound with the 9/11 anniversary and the fact that one of the biggest tragedies our nation has ever seen, arguably the biggest tragedy our nation has ever seen, just with the cruel intention behind it. All of that is so emotional and just heavy. And we feel like we need to talk to you guys about it.
Yeah, so for me, this has been a heavier time than I would have anticipated, but I think that is the response that a lot of us have felt. I unknowingly watched the footage right after it happened of Kirk, which I don't recommend anybody watch.
No.
It was just the first thing that I clicked on when I heard the news, and I Googled what was happening and I saw it. And you watch something that nobody should ever have to see or nobody should ever have to experience. I wouldn't recommend seeking that out. Loss of a life is never something to willingly subject yourself to, I don't think.
I think it's really important to note how affected you were from seeing that. And in hindsight, we just did a prayer moment. I should have prayed for that. And I'm sorry that I didn't. And I will be praying for that for you and for our listeners, because it affected you very deeply. And it's very difficult as a father and a husband who needs to provide a sense of security to your family to witness that secondhand through a video and then have to be like, welcome home from school, kids. Everything's fine. It's not easy. So thank you for still like being our rock. But I also see how it's affected you. And I'm so sorry that you saw that.
Thank you.
I love you.
But that takes away from what has happened.
No, I know, but I want to acknowledge that because the people who have seen it, like God can help them unsee that. And the only way to process that kind of trauma is through prayer.
It's a needed response to trauma. I think one of the issues that we see in the culture today is the desensitizing of situations like this one and Iryna's and any other violent crimes. A lot of people just skate over or don't have a second thought, one, because they didn't see it, and two, for some reason as a culture and I think as a worldview, we have desensitized ourselves to the sacredness of life and what that truly means and what it means to lose that.
We were talking about that in the car the other day with like hedonic adaptation. It's a psychology term, but it's basically like something happens and you hit this threshold that's like a new threshold of pain or joy, could be good or bad. And once you've hit that threshold, unless you intentionally train your mind to go back to the last threshold, you keep escalating. It's why with people who are addicted to pornography, they tend to statistically seek out more and more abusive, violent, intense things because it doesn't cut it for them anymore. And it's the same thing with stuff like seeing somebody get murdered. That is the kind of thing that if you don't intentionally scale yourself mentally and emotionally back and process it, you won't be shocked by it. You won't grieve. You won't understand the gravity of it. And as a nation, we have been conditioned with social media to see a lot of things in a day. And so our thresholds are continually rising to new levels that humanity has never even seen.
What's interesting about the Charlie Kirk assassination is there's a guy on YouTube called Asmongold. He's a streamer. He streams a lot for gaming on Twitch and things like that. And he also does political commentaries as well. He remarked on this assassination that he watched the video as well. And he's a guy who, like so many people who are a product of the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation, they act as if they've been completely desensitized to dark things, to evil things, terrible things, that it just doesn't faze us anymore. But he said what struck him about this is that it did faze him, that he's seen a lot of graphic things because graphic material is all over the internet, but this felt truly graphic. And I think one of the reasons is because, unlike every other instance where you can desensitize, you can disassociate because it's not someone you know. For Charlie, whether or not you knew him personally or whether you knew much about him, you were aware of his existence, and he was a decent guy. His face was all over the place. Shorts from him are on YouTube all the time, like clips from his debates, like his public debates, where he's just letting anyone walk up and talk to him, and he's very kind and he's very compassionate. Everyone just knows him. It's like Mr. Rogers. You don't really watch the full episodes anymore. You're too old for that, and yet you know who he is. And it affected you when he died. And it's very much that way with Charlie. And I imagine there are probably listeners who are hearing us talk about him and thinking, why are you guys talking about him? Wasn't he a Nazi? Wasn't he evil? And no, he wasn't. There were a lot of terrible things that were said about him that weren't true because he took positions that were countercultural. When you actually listen to his positions, he was always very sympathetic. He didn't hate transgender people. He didn't hate gay people. He didn't hate communists. But he was against all of those things. And if you asked him why, he would give you a reason why and would say he doesn't hate any of these people, but he doesn't believe any of it's right. And for that position, he got killed. There's no other way to say it, because he disagrees with the patterns of this world, the positions of this world. He had to die. And that's relevant to us today, because I was thinking about this. Like, I struggled a lot with Charlie's death. I didn't follow him a whole lot, but I was aware of his content. I've seen some of it, and I thought he was a decent guy. He's an important guy. Like, he was Turning Point USA. And now they're trying to figure out how to continue without him. But what I was wondering was, how many of us are so dangerous to the enemy that the enemy wants us dead? Charlie was one of those guys who, you may disagree with him politically, but his politics was based on his faith, and that's always what he grounded everything in. He was a Christian first, but he discussed things through the lens of politics because more people are familiar with politics than they are with religion, with their own faith. And so it's the best way to find out what someone truly believes. Ask them about their politics.
I do want to make the point as well to those people who are listening and they're like scratching their head. We're not saying that Charlie was perfect, that he walked on water, that we agreed with everything he ever said and did. What we're saying is that human life is sacred, and what he fought for and what he stood for by going onto college campuses and trying to de-radicalize students who were being encouraged by their professors to think things that are not logical, not loving, not kind, not gentle, even outside of the Bible. He met people where they were at, and he talked to them. We have very few people with boldness to do such a thing. It was completely different than just standing on a street corner and screaming, "Repent and you shall be saved."
Yeah, he wasn't shoving his ideas down people's throat. And I think that's one of the things you learn if you watch his full videos of his campus discussions and why he was so popular with the younger generation. Like, he started off very young. He had massive impact with the younger college, high school generation because he would let them think for themselves. Like, he would let you come up and have a voice to reason with him. He would give you opportunity to discuss your point and why he is wrong in his thinking and have dialogue on that, not just shame you like so many individuals today of, okay, this is what's right. I'm not going to listen to you at all. I'm not going to even give you the opportunity to speak. I'm right. You're wrong. End of discussion. No, he gave people a mic in front of thousands of others to come up and have a reasonable discussion on why they thought certain things or certain issues or certain touch points and why he disagreed with that or agreed. A lot of his stuff he actually agreed with people on or would sympathize to the situations that they're coming from certain aspects, and very ecumenical for both sides in his discussions and how he approached things.
And he ran the gambit of, some people would stand up there and just be like, "You're a coward, you're a liar, nothing you say is real." And he would take that. He wouldn't agree with them, but he would take that. But then he would have conversations with people who hated him and didn't agree with him. And suddenly they were loving each other. And it was like watching a miracle happen, because somebody with a hard heart softened, and they didn't walk away completely changed necessarily, but they had something to chew on. And I think one of the biggest faults or flaws of being a parent or being in a position of leadership, even in the church, we talk about this all the time, is the "because I said so" mentality. You can't make up your own mind. Your faith is my faith because I said so. You believe what I believe because I said so. What I'm saying is true because I said so. And there's no proof. There's no evidence. There's no analysis. And so as a young person who grew up in that, and also in a political system who's telling us that, Charlie Kirk stood out as somebody who was like, "No, chew on it. Figure it out for yourself. But here's some truth to get you through that." It's very hard as a parent. Like, I have a teenage daughter, and there are days where I want to be like, "Your outfit doesn't look right. You're a mess. You stink. Your attitude stinks." And like a lot of the stuff that I want to control, I can't control. And it scares the heck out of me, because she's about to be able to drive a car and get a job and go to college and do all of the things that young adults do and find a future husband and get married, and her whole life is starting. And I have zero control over that. And I would much rather have meaningful conversations with my kids that allow them to make up their own mind than put them through a phase of deconstruction where they don't know if they can trust anything and they end up believing lies because they weren't put on the right path by me. I failed them.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that Charlie did super was he understood both sides. It wasn't he just understood his side really well. He understood the full picture and how to pick apart the reason or pick apart the logic and certain trains of thought. He was very good at debating and in a civil way. And something I think we could learn for our kids, and just the situation of sending them off. He did target largely liberal universities and the discussions there to get more impact for what he was after. He did do like Liberty University and a lot of the conservative Christian universities as well, but he really wanted to have the dialogue with the opposing side rather than everybody coming up to him agreeing with what he's saying. He wanted to have dialogue with those who opposed his views, to have a conversation about the differences and where we could come together in those differences and where to draw the line in his train of thought versus their train of thought. He would draw that line very well. But the thing I think we can learn from that is, as parents, we have a tendency to not give our children the opportunity to see both sides of the story, or both sides of the coin. With Christianity, I grew up in a household that Christianity was it. That's all we talked about. There was no alternatives. You hear about the atheist on the other side, or you hear about the left wing or the right wing, or where we're at, but it's mainly this is the right way of thought. We're not going to go into why the other side potentially believes these areas are correct. One of the videos that I appreciate of Charlie's the most is father-son. The father is very liberal. The son is very conservative. They're basically having a argument with each other while they're talking to Charlie. And Charlie breaks it up and you guys need to understand that the dad is from an older generation where government was seen as less corrupt, more dependable. And the son is coming from a completely different line of thinking where government has done nothing but really lie to us recently, and seeing that for what it is. So the ideas of their politics are completely different because they were raised completely different. They were products of a different generation, of a different time. But ultimately, he said, you guys should put that aside because nothing is more important than your guys' relationship. Politics shouldn't separate your guys' relationship from each other. That's first and foremost what you should do before discussing politics. So appreciated the take on that and understanding both sides. Like he could speak to both sides and understanding where the two were coming from.
One of the common denominators in Charlie's videos, but then there are other people who do similar things on street corners. They'll interview people. One of the common denominators that I see for why people are so wretchedly angry when people talk to them about Jesus is because of trauma. There is so much hurt that the church has caused. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and to help people understand that's not how it's meant to be. And Charlie was really good at rerouting people to understand that the actions of one person doesn't represent the church in its entirety. And the ability to address that, and then in other people's videos to pray over those people, it's not necessarily that you're suddenly going to raise your hand and be like, I'm a Christian now, because that's not how it works. Like even going through deconstruction, even for me, being 25 years old and becoming a Christian for the first time, if you are truly a Christian, you're going to wrestle. You're going to flip-flop. If faith is allegiance, that takes time. I don't think any wise person or smart person has ever just been like, Give me your 5-minute pyramid scheme spiel, and then I will trust you and do everything you say for the rest of my life. And if we look at the humanity behind these choices and the things that are being said on both sides, there is so much hurt. And there are two things that are universal for humankind. Okay, the first thing is suffering. We could get caught up there, and it's easy. Like, I get stuck in suffering a lot. I feel very grieved for the world and for the people around me because there is so much suffering, and every single person has their own version of it, whether they're rich or poor, whether they are social or not, whether they have a big family or a small family, are lonely or not lonely. It doesn't matter. Suffering is completely universal. And you get stuck there, you get bitter there. But if you look at it from God's perspective and the way that we were designed to be on this earth for a purpose, then we also have equal capacity for love. And if the second most important command to loving your God above all else is to love one another more than yourself, then we're failing in that capacity.
Yeah, there's that Maya Angelou quote that I love, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. She talks about that the worst thing any human has done, we all have the capacity for. We have the capacity for the worst evil that has ever been committed by a human. We have that capacity because we are also too human. But that also means that we have the capacity for the most loving human that has ever existed. And that's what we should strive for. We shouldn't strive for the most evil thing. We should strive for the most loving thing.
Yeah. It's easy to believe that life is a holding cell for something else. Like, we're just pigs in a pen waiting for the end times. And some of us will get burned alive and some of us will go to heaven and live happily ever after. And it's a really morbid way of looking at it. And I just got done reading The Secret Garden with 2 of our younger kids. And I've been thinking a lot about it because it reminds me so much of God and where we are today. Because in The Secret Garden, this husband and his wife build this beautiful place, and the bride dies. His wife dies. And so he locks away the beautiful place, and he leaves it this desolation, like broken, horrible, dead looking place. And this little girl comes, she's an orphan. She sneaks into the garden. She finds a way in, and she starts cultivating it. It would be one thing if she had broken into the garden and like snuck stuff, stole and hid it in the garden, or just laid on her back and looked at the sunshine. And there's nothing wrong with taking a break, but if that's all she did, and that was the whole point of her being there, it wouldn't have been pleasing to the father who owned, the husband who owned this property. And she ends up finding his son who's hidden away, thinking he's disabled, and he's not. And she convinces him that he's not, and they cultivate this garden together. And their fear at the end is, will he reject what they have done, or will he be pleased? And eventually he comes upon them in the garden, and he is pleased because they have cultivated something. If our purpose in this secret garden that we're in today is to wallow in despair and deadness, then I don't think we're doing our part as Christians. And I think when we think about, well done, my good and faithful servant, when we die, I think we have to consider what we have cultivated, because it's not a matter of salvation. You can be a Christian and not cultivate much, but what are you doing to cultivate around you or in you in preparation for the Father returning and the garden being unlocked for good? That's my thought. We could get stuck on a lot of this semantics, politics, anger, hurt, brokenness, suffering. You have to use those things to cultivate something good, something that will grow, something that will be alive. And with the breath of God within us, we are completely within authority to do such a thing. And we have to remind ourselves of that.
My concern going forward, and I've already seen some of this, and I'm not accusing you guys of any of this, but something that I've started to see already, and I expect a lot of us will hear on Sunday, is the pastor is going to get behind the pulpit and he's going to say it's tragedy what happened to Charlie, if it's even brought up at all. However, we need to not turn in anger. We need to let it go. We need to love our enemies, pray for those who persecute us. All of that is true, but it's the first half of what we should do. The truth is that anger in and of itself is not an evil. The question is, what are you angry at? And that is something we need to be brutally honest with ourselves about. What is it that we're angry at? If you say in your heart, and you need to be honest, in your heart of hearts, are you angry at liberals? Are you angry at the people who've been pushing this? I understand if you're angry at them, but our battle is not with flesh and blood. Our anger should be directed at the ideology itself, at the ideas that Charlie was fighting, at the ideas that we should be fighting as Christians. The idea that gender confusion is a good thing, that the best way to help these people who are struggling is to tell them that they're right about themselves. The idea that sexuality is a completely fluid thing, that there are 1,000,000,001 genders and thus 1,000,000,001 different sexualities. All of them are valid. You can have sexual attraction to animals, and it's perfectly acceptable. You can have sexual attraction to tons of men or tons of women, or both men and women at the same time, or children. You can identify as a child and be attracted to children, and whatever it is that you feel is right. These are all things that Charlie ardently spoke out about. And these are many of the things that, for his talk, people responded with threats and hatred. And they still do. And they point out all kinds of things that he either said or actually didn't say. Mostly positions that he never held. But mainly it's just the idea that he stood against these ideas, and so for that he needs to die. It's important for all of us to stand against these things as well. And I think many of us as Christians, either we stand against them in the wrong way, like you mentioned before, Gina, walking up to the people who hold them and calling them abominations, or we are afraid of hurting the person, and so we don't fight the ideology. The anger that I feel at this, and I am angry, the calmness in my voice may belie that point, but I am angry. This anger should push me to fight the idea, not the people. I have many people in my family who I love, but who hold to many of these ideas. And there have been times where I've been put in situations where it would have been reasonable to discuss them in love, but discuss them directly, firmly, with the truth. But every time that possibility, that chance has come up, I've said no, because I don't want to hurt someone. I don't want to hurt the people that I love. That is a concern. That's something that we should be worried about. But this happening to Charlie shows the fact that if the lies are allowed to continue, people do get hurt by them. Again, our battle is not with flesh and blood. We shouldn't be looking at the people who buy into this and point to them and say they are the enemy. They are victims in this. And it may be difficult to look at these people as victims. And to be fair, not all of them are. It does take a measure of wisdom to know if someone knowingly stands against God, or has been lied to and so buys into the lie and doesn't know what they're doing. Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. For me, the hardest thing to do is to balance the concept of goodness, of both justice and mercy, to pray for the shooter, to pray for salvation, to pray for forgiveness, but to recognize justice needs to be done. Because right now there is a woman and 2 children who is missing a husband and father. One of the girls apparently heard the gunshot go off, was scared, and ran to her father. He was already dead. That's horrifying. That's terrible. And I hope that one day the shooter comes to understand the true gravity of what happened and can ask for forgiveness. And when that happens, I believe with my heart entirely that he will receive it. But if he never asks for forgiveness, what happens?
Destruction.
Destruction.
You know, and all those people condemning the shooter, like what you just said is what Charlie would have wanted. Like repenting, coming to God, and living in heaven with him. That's exactly what he would have wanted.
But it takes the untwisting of the mind. And if someone's mind has been warped by outside influence that is not pure, by satanic influence, like demonic influence, I'm going to call it what it is, it's very difficult to come out from that. And just like in the Bible where the demon was cast out, but then 7 more took its place, if you're not equipped to have something removed and then filled with the right thing, then it's going to cause more harm. So It's our job as Christians to call that out, but to replace it. You don't just say, hey, you did a bad thing. Do better. No. You can't do that. You can't expect that to work. Come on.
To simply tell people what the right thing isn't enough. And I found that there are a lot of Christians who are heavy into the philosophy side of things who start with that. They're like, if we teach the right thing, if we teach the good thing, combat the evil with the good, then eventually that will lead people to Jesus. And honestly, that was the position that I held for a long time. And it's not a position that's held through courage. It's the cowardly position, because the reality is what they need is Jesus. And there is almost an embarrassment for many people, an embarrassment of the fact that we believe in the supernatural, angels and demons. This is very much a spiritual war. But for many Christians, we're very much a product of the materialist era. We think we need to explain things in terms of endorphins and dopamine and the brain and the way that it works, biochemistry. That's not the full picture. That's not even the surface. The reality is this is spiritual war. Christ, you've said it 1,000 times, Cody, and it bears so much weight that we still don't fully understand the full scope of Christ's life, death, and resurrection, all of that accomplished. We see that the number of gods that were worshipped plummeted off the edge of a cliff after his resurrection. The Egyptian gods, gone. A lot of the Roman gods within a few hundred years, gone. Like we discussed that in our episode on Christmas, that the festivals that they were holding were just becoming empty, obsolete, and the emperors were upset at that. Like, why? Christ did something to shift the scape of the war. And it seems like every generation or so, there's, just like with Israel itself, there's a generation that knows God and a generation that doesn't. And there's always a remnant between. But it's like we get the awakenings, the awakened generation that fully embraces that reality, that spiritual truth, and is able to fight and gain ground and win. And then things get good, and we forget, and the enemy regains ground. Right now, what we desperately need is an awakening. We need people with that awakened spiritual power of the Holy Spirit who recognize the fight for what it is.
And accept that we will not be comforted anymore. Comfort is irrelevant.
Comfort's irrelevant. I think as a culture, and you see the pendulum swing, you have the persecution of the church where if you didn't believe what the church said, the church would kill you. Then we have where I think we're at today is we're just this passive group of people who lays down to bolster peace, quote unquote. We call it peace, but it's just having no backbone and no foundation and no stance on anything. We just conform to what we're told to conform to as Christians and to not cause conflict because it's not what the New Testament says. I see the argument all the time of people will quote, and you quoted it the other day, David didn't go up to Goliath and tell him he loved him before he killed him. No, he stood and fought and killed. And I'm not saying we should go out and kill people, but we're not taking this passive approach. And people say, well, that's the Old Testament. Okay. What do you think Paul did? I've heard so many Christians or seen so many Christians say Charlie had what was coming to him.
Because he was so disruptive.
He was divisive. What do you think the Apostle Paul was doing?
Yeah, have you read the New Testament?
Have you read the New Testament and what they were doing? Paul went to the Acropolis. He went into hostile territory. He wasn't kumbaya and singing. He got stoned. He got persecuted. Like he wasn't going and attacking people, but he was going to stir the pot for sure. And in Ephesus, like people got so frustrated with him because he was going and converting people from the worship of, what was it, Dionysus or...
Oh, the guys that made the statues came after him?
Yeah, because their sales had plummeted because they're not buying these idols anymore and they're getting ticked off. And like he went in to stir the pot. Like all of the apostles went in to challenge the status quo, to challenge what had been taught, to go and talk out against what was being taught and deliver truth. And I think Charlie did that exact thing. He did it in love. Like, his goal wasn't to win arguments. It wasn't to make people look stupid. It was to have people come to Jesus. It was to show them that there was goodness in the open discussion and dialogue between individuals to come to a agreement on where you're at in life, and to ultimately, he was an apologist. I fully believe that, to come to Jesus. And that was his main objective.
And another thing that I think a lot of people get off, that again is only part of the truth. I think a lot of Christians today have this image of the Christians of the Old Testament, and thus the Christians of the New Testament, like Paul and his generation, as passive, completely defenseless, never attacking back. We see all these stories about like Paul being stoned. He doesn't fight back. Jesus tells Peter not to fight back when they come to seize him. And so there are a lot of people who get this image of the modern Christian being a pacifist, never lifting up their hand to defend themselves. And
a pious martyr.
Yes, a pious martyr, just going off to their death in dignity with a very serene
Stoic
look on their face. Just like, and there are plenty of instances in the Bible of people doing that. But Gina, you brought up a very important verse earlier today, not while we were recording, but the verse in Ecclesiastes about to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. One is a time to fight, a time to kill, a time to heal. One of the difficult, very difficult things about being a Christian is knowing that distinction. When Jesus says the meek shall inherit the earth, he's not talking about intellectual prowess, about being able to have a powerful mind but keep it back. That's a part of it. But it's also physical ability. It is real power, the ability to take someone's life and yet not, to be dangerous but be gentle as a lamb. And for many men in the church, it feels like they've been encouraged for much of their lives to be a lamb with no teeth, to be docile, to not be dangerous. And I understand why, because that's what we see. The big emphasized stories are Stephen the martyr getting stoned to death, not protecting himself. We don't focus on the passage where Jesus literally tells some of the disciples to sell their cloaks and buy swords. We don't focus on that because shortly after that, Jesus tells Peter not to attack. But why? He just told them to get swords. Well, as it turns out, for everything, there is a season. There are points where God is going to demand your life, because the loss of your life will lead to people seeing that you're right. Again, our fight is not flesh and blood. But at the same time, Paul talks about how he battled wild animals and also bandits during his travels. This is not something that's dwelled on a lot, but it's something that is mentioned. And I'm not bringing this up to say we need to fight right now. No, absolutely not. What I'm bringing up is the fact that it's difficult, and it's a difficult thing to know when to do, and so a lot of people don't bother. It is just easier to be innocent and defenseless.
There's a verse that says that the tongue has the power of life and death. And I think our duty right now is to use our tongue for the power of life and death. It's not that we want to go and shoot somebody. That is not
Correct.
at all what we are saying. But in spiritual warfare, we have authority and dominion over the enemy. We have the ability to speak and he will be silenced and crushed. Use your mouth to declare that authority, but know that you will make yourself a target, as Charlie did.
Also, Charlie was a very firm believer in your right to self-defense, and there were a lot of people who misunderstood that and thought that he was very pro-gun or very pro-killing. That's not at all what he meant. That's not what he believed. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The reason that the founders put the justification clause in the beginning of the amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, that's what's called a justification clause. They are explaining why the right of the people to keep and bear arms exists. It is for protection. You don't kill because of the jollies of it. You don't kill because there are people who don't like you or you don't like. You have arms, not even specifically to kill, because they don't talk about killing. They talk about a militia. a well-regulated militia, and the Militia Act of 1794 specifically expounds on what that is. What the founders wanted was a righteous people who were strong and capable and willing to hold the government to account, but not the kind of people who would go around just killing people. That's not what we do. That's not what we're called to be. That is the essence of meekness, to be capable, to be strong, to have power, but have the wisdom to hold back. And sadly, that sometimes that does mean you will die when you could have done something. And sadly, that's what happened to Charlie. It was a preventable death. It was a very sad death.
All of the deaths we talked about at the beginning of this episode were entirely preventable. All of the injuries, all of the fear, all of the anger, it's entirely preventable.
But at least with Charlie, he didn't die alone. I'm very thankful for the fact he didn't have to go through that alone. As terrible as it was for his family to be there, for Iryna, she died alone. There was no one there to shed a tear for her, no one there to help her. I watched that whole video, and as upset as Charlie's video makes me, and thank God I didn't watch the whole thing, just enough to get an idea for what happened. Iryna's, I did watch the whole thing. And the poor girl curls up into a ball and bleeds out and dies alone. For 90 seconds, nobody does anything to help her. They stand around and watch, and the poor girl, she goes off alone. Is there a more tragic thing? Is there a more unchristian thing in this world than someone going off alone?
I remember 2 years ago, my uncle died, and I was there. I was taking care of him. And the Holy Spirit was present with me in my grief. And I felt that he grieved more than I did. And I was comforted because he was there. But I can't imagine putting somebody through the torment of dying and not having a hand to hold theirs and not having somebody say, it's okay. I'm going to make sure everything's okay for you. Your kids are going to be okay. There's no assurance for her. And as an immigrant, especially, like, my job is to work with immigrants. Like, that's what I do for a living. I deal with parents who are here undocumented. Do I politically agree that they should be here? No. But they are human beings, and the lack of resources and representation for them is devastating. People are dying. Babies are dying because their parents are too scared to leave the house and get the supplies that they need. Iryna died alone. And if you try to Google her name or ask ChatGPT about all of the notable murders and shootings of this week, it will leave her off the list. Why? Because she's pitiful? I don't mean that to be cruel. It's the most pitiful thing I've ever heard. It's pathetic that people let her bleed out all alone. If you can't have the boldness to grab someone's hand, what are you? It's trending right now, this whole lukewarm Christian thing. Like, it's not lukewarm. That's not lukewarm. You are not a God-fearing person if you think you can face God after standing around watching something like that and doing nothing, even if it was just holding her hand and praying.
It's hard because for a lot of people, their lives haven't been touched by malevolence. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, the idea that for many of us, it's not that we're innocent so much as just nothing has happened. And one of the reasons that we're called as Christians to go out and help people to fight this war is because through that we are exposed to malevolence. You don't have to acclimate yourself to the evil of this world by doing it. For many people, their conversion stories is they were terrible people before, and then they know God's grace and they're forgiven, and so they truly love God, and that is beautiful. You don't have to do that in order to be able to combat evil. You don't have to have experienced it or done it to know how to fight it. But for many people, they're very sheltered from it, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. They're scared of it. There are people who are scared of doubts and will leave churches because they're terrified of even the possibility of a doubt. That is a kind of dark thing. Doubt is a terrifying thing, but you have to confront it, and in learning to confront it, you gain a boldness. For the people in that car with her, there was no boldness. There was the people there who knew what was happening had been touched by darkness and never faced it. They wanted nothing to do with it. And there were many people there who had never experienced darkness of any kind and couldn't tell what was happening in front of them. It was a combination of both fear and complete ignorance. I never want to be that. But the truth is that any one of us could be that idiot standing there staring at a dying person and having no clue what to do. I don't want to be that. No Christian should want to be that. No man should want to be that. The men on that train, I can't stand that. I can't stand to look at those men and think none of them stepped in to help her, even if they could do nothing. What are we for? What is our purpose if not for that? Why are we even here?
It's one thing Gina always tells me when I travel.
Be a hero.
Be a hero. That spurred from this time, 9/11.
Literally,
Like,
that's why I say it.
I know. Be a hero. And it's not be a hero for the glory. It's
If someone's going to do something, you stop them because you're capable of it. You don't just sit there and cower and make a sad phone call saying, I love you. No, you fight. I know you love me. I don't need you to call me. I've told you that.
And Jesus warns us that and it sounds strange, it was a passage I never understood as a kid, but you need to hate your mother and your father and sister and brother. That makes no sense from a Christian perspective. We're told to love everyone, to love our parents, to respect them, to honor them. But Jesus tells us to hate them. What he means by that is that if you are going to seek the truth, if you're going to pursue it, if you are going to stand with Christ, then there is going to come a time where something is going to be asked of you that if you give it, will impact the people you love the most. And you're going to have to make a decision. Do you love Christ or do you love your family? You may very well love both, but you have to choose one and put the other second. And in biblical terms, that's what it means to hate. Jacob I've loved, Esau I have hated. I have placed second, beneath, rejected.
I will get really vulnerable here for a second because this is so relatable for me. One, because I'm adopted out of foster care, and my adoptive mother and I are not on speaking terms. I am estranged from her primarily because of our differences in beliefs and just the fact that it is completely irreconcilable. And that sounds bad, except for the fact that she was extremely abusive and neglectful to me as well, not only as a child, but as an adult. And those two things combined just make us incompatible. And so we don't talk. She wants to talk to me. I can't do it anymore. But beside that, knowing that I'm adopted, I have a whole biological family I found when I was 25. So the year that I became a Christian is also the year that I got married, is also the year that I found my biological family. In that first year that I found them, I connected with one of my siblings. I was able to connect with three of them, but only one of them wanted a relationship with me. It was my sister. And she was terminally ill, and she died 8 months after I met her. I had a younger brother and an older brother, and my older brother ghosted me, and my younger brother ghosted me too. And we followed each other on Facebook, and I noticed with my younger brother that he was posting a lot of things like F Donald Trump, and if you're a conservative or a Republican, then just unfriend me now. And I was so scared to be rejected that I just didn't even try to have a relationship with him. Like I was pretty cowardly. And even now I'm really struggling because he reached out to me and he's been texting me on and off for 6 months. And we had our first phone call last week. And I sat there afterwards because we talked on the phone for 3 hours. And I sat there afterwards and I was like, Cody, why now? Like, why is God opening this door now after basically 11 years of rejection from my biological family on and off? My dad's side won't have anything to do with me because it's very disruptive to his marriage and he passed away and they don't want anything to do with me, and fine. But my biological mother's family gave me so many moments where they were excited to know me and then ghosted me. And it was such a powerful feeling of rejection. And then I felt like I had to reject them because our values were so different. And my younger brother even told me when I first found him that he wasn't religious and was an atheist. And I was so caught off guard. And I think now God has opened that door because I am equipped and empowered to talk to him about things that really matter. I was a brand new Christian. I got baptized the week before I got married. And 2 months later, I found my brothers. Like, I wasn't ready then. I'm ready now. And that's really scary because I know it's entirely possible that if I screw up, he rejects me. And not only will I lose out on the relationship that I've wanted since I was a little girl, but heaven won't have my brother. And that hurts me. We have to be really cautious in our spiritual maturity, how we reach people. And sometimes we're not ready. And if that happens to you and you don't know what to say, ask for help. Get yourself to the point where you are mature enough. Because in the 10 years since I've gotten married, my sister died, my mother died, my father died, my grandmother got dementia, and my brothers are not getting along anymore, and they used to be best friends. So much has changed, and so much opportunity has been lost where I could have preached the gospel to these people, and now I can't. I have one person left that's willing to talk to me. Like, this is my shot, and I can't screw it up. When I found my biological father and his father, my grandfather, I found out that he was a raging alcoholic who literally goes to the bar at 10 o'clock every morning and spends his retirement money on booze, just spends his whole life drunk. And I felt very convicted to call him. I've shared this before, but I'll share it again. I hesitated 3 years ago. I hesitated. I sat in my adoptive dad's driveway, and I was shaking, and I knew what I needed to do. I knew that I needed to call this person because God had told me to. And just to tell him, like, God loves him. Like, you matter. And I called him too late. And this man said to me, I don't know you. And that is exactly what my greatest fear in my life is, like that God will say that to me at the end of my life. I don't know you. I'm being tested in this way, hating my family. I don't hate them. I hate their ideology. I hate the fact that they're trapped. But it's my job to minister to them as best I can. God has told me when I am done that I am done. With my mother, I am done. But with my brother, I'm not. And he's reopened that door, and I am terrified. That's what I have to say about that. Being vulnerable, completely honest. It's the most terrifying thing to have to preach the gospel to someone who can reject you and have it mean something.
As with so many things, it takes wisdom to know what you need to do. And it's good. The Lord will generally make it clear, if you trust him, if you're acting in prayer, which people you're allowed to let go of. But it's 1,000 times worse when the person you can't let go of is someone who can let go of you. And it's someone for who you care, and one wrong move can lead to everything falling apart.
And then God gives you this assignment, and you could fail, and you could have to pay for that later in a conversation with the Lord. If it's scary now for me to call my brother and minister to him, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when God's, dude, you failed. Bad job, Gina. How can I face that? How can I hesitate? How could I possibly stumble? Because I don't want his wrath.
Those are the experiences that we have to learn from, though. On the topic of vulnerability, and we're preaching to take a stand and to go help those who are in need. But I think if we're honest, there's been times when we haven't done that. At least for me, there has been. Like, so there's a gentleman that I used to work with, and his idea of hanging out, like, so to start at the beginning, actually, though, I lived in Ohio when I first started for this company, quickly moved up into management. They wanted me to be at the corporate office, was down here in Florida. So we moved down here in Florida, and I was training or working with this other individual, and he was the only one who showed me like kindness or hospitality.
He was so eager to be your friend.
He was. I did things in capacity that I could, but a lot of his ideas of going out or spending time together were going to like strip clubs or going out and drinking. And I'm not opposed to having a beer or two, but that wasn't his idea of going out and drinking. So I wrote him off, and I'd still have a great working relationship with him and some company events. We still had a great dialogue as far as you can be on a professional term, but didn't take it any further than that. Didn't talk to him about faith. Like, he knew I was religious, but I never spoke to him about my faith or Christianity or anything like that. And then 2 years after I moved down here, he ended up passing away from alcoholism. So his heart gave out, and come to find out, he would drink a liter of vodka a night. A lonely guy, like, knew he was lonely. But I didn't do anything to reach out to him. And it was, and still is, one of the driving factors for listening to that nudge of going to help people, because I failed. Like, I failed him. I failed God in that instance. I failed him in that instance. And who's to say anything I could have done, like if I would have reached him or any of that, and not blaming myself for his death or anything, but I did nothing in that instance. And hindsight's 2020, and you can look back and feel guilty about it. But what are you changing about yourself to not let that happen again?
It wasn't even just that you failed in terms of not doing anything. Like, you had me in your ear saying, that guy's a pervert. I don't want you going to strip clubs. I don't want you going out to bars. Stay away from him. He's weird. Like, I totally judged him. I met him one time. He had the grace to welcome us to his home, make us a steak dinner, introduce us to his whole family the first week that we lived in Florida. And instead of taking that at face value and seeing the goodness in him, I completely judged him, didn't want anything to do with him. And I'm so mad at myself that I did that. Like, we both failed, but I failed both of you. Like, it haunts me. And there are moments with people you meet where I'm like, that guy, have to remember that guy.
Failure is typically how God teaches us the importance of something. When my brother died, I thought I knew what I needed to do. I thought the right way forward was to not mourn, that mourning would be an admission of, it's an act of unfaithfulness. It's saying, I don't really believe that my brother is in heaven or wherever he is supposed to be. That needing to mourn means I don't have the power of the Spirit with me, that for some reason I thought Christians just had to be able to bear this and be happy and show the world that we have peace in the midst of these terrible things that are happening. And I was wrong. And because I was as wrong as I was, I denied my mother the chance to mourn with me properly. I denied my sisters, my brother, the ability to mourn with me properly. And it wasn't a good thing. In fact, it was a sin in and of itself. Christ mourned the death of Lazarus, and he was going to bring him back in 5 minutes, for Pete's sake. We have to mourn with people. Jesus mourned in part because the people around him were mourning. It's a beautiful, an important thing to mourn with the people around us. Not just because not everyone has the same hope that we do, but we mourn as those who have hope. We acknowledge the darkness of death, the evil of it, but also the fact that we have hope. But if you don't mourn, if you live a lie, if you live as if you aren't mourning, if you engage in that act of cowardice where you don't let yourself feel the fear and the grief, and you don't allow God the chance to deal with it with you, you're denying God something that's his. You're denying your family something that's theirs, that should be theirs. And so because I went through that and I screwed up, now I understand. And now when I see people mourning, I want to mourn with them. When I see people hurting, I want to hurt with them. When I see people succeeding after the pain, I want them to really enjoy that. I want to enjoy it with them. But I only feel that way because I screwed up so horrifically the first time where it mattered the most to my family and to me. God let me do it. He could have stopped me. He could have forced me out of it. He could force any of us out of the situations that we're in. He lets these things happen because it's important for us to learn. It's the only way we will fully grasp the importance of something, by doing it wrong. It's the most frustrating, bizarre contradiction that the people who love God the most are the people who've been forgiven of the most heinous things. Why is it that we can't just do everything right? Why can't we be a Joseph? Why can't we coast through life seemingly not doing anything wrong, making all the right decisions? But as we're going to see, most likely next week, because I don't think we're going to get to it here, Joseph was not the closest out of his family to God. Joseph wasn't chosen. Judah was, the guy who screwed up in Joseph's story. We get a tiny detour and we get to see this screw up who nearly kills a pregnant woman out of rage. And his one act of humility, his mishandling of the situation, leads him to make the ultimate sacrifice for his youngest brother. The act of love that I do believe set him apart from his brothers. Reuben offers to sacrifice his own children if Benjamin doesn't come back. Judah ultimately takes the sacrifice both for Reuben's children and for Benjamin. His screw-up leads to his greatest understanding of what it means to sacrifice for those you love. So, a difficult lesson to learn is also to have some grace for ourselves, because we're not perfect, and because sometimes God lets us screw up so that we can know him better. And I think it is a tool of the enemy, one that I've indulged in way too much, to look at the person you were at the time and hate that person. You didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, but now I do.
Yes.
And now I have this assignment, like a new assignment that like I know better.
Now, yes.
Yeah.
No, in times like these, I think, is where we can evaluate that, in ourselves, the response. Not only is the secular response to these situations horrendous, but bad theology is popping up left and right here. One of the reasons why we dislike Calvinism so much is because it puts God as the aggressor in these situations, the one actively causing the death of Kirk or Iryna. Like, that is not the God I serve. And that is not the mentality I'm going to have. Oh, God has this greater plan. It's okay because God has this greater plan. Death is not okay. As you said, Ben, like, Jesus knew that he was going to bring Lazarus back, but he still mourned. Death is not okay. And it is not something that God wants for anybody. And I think that's just bad theology. And then we have the opposite side of that, where people are like, we're just destined for something better than this. This is just our temporary holding cell. Like, we can't mourn because it would be dishonoring to God because we are destined for heaven. And that is bad theology too. What has happened is horrendous and absolutely preventable. And it is the Christian's duty to prevent that from happening in the future. It is our duty
on either side.
Like, each side has major flaws. If you don't see the flaws in your own party, you have the blinders on for sure. Both sides are not perfect. And it is Christians' duty to foremost stand up for what Scripture says, for
truth.
Jesus says, and for truth. Above all else, truth. That's what we should be pursuing, not getting along, not I'm just here waiting till I go to heaven. Oh, God determines everything, so it doesn't really matter what I do anyway. No, you have an active part to play. God has, for whatever reason, put us in charge of ourselves and the world we live in, to be active components in that, bringing his kingdom, his will, how we can.
We cultivate.
We cultivate. We bring Jesus to earth. And this isn't like the worship songs, I want heaven to come down. No, we're called to be the living representations of Christ for the outside world. As Israel was the representation for God in their era, Christians are the representation for God in the modern era. And that means standing up for what is right, defending the weak and innocent, and pursuing truth.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.